Chag Sameach, that means happy festival. It means festival joy. Chag is circle dance or festival. And Sameach is from Samach, which means joy, happiness, happy festival. It's Hanukkah. It is the third night. Tonight will be the third night of Hanukkah. So today's the second day of Hanukkah. And I have a teaching that, I haven't done this in a long, long time, where I start with the Torah portion and then move into the time of year that we're in. I usually just teach Torah portion. Well, today, this Shabbat, I'm going to tie in Hanukkah at the end of the teaching. So basically, this entire teaching is one word. One word from the Torah portion, one word. It's a Bible study on one word. But it's a word that is not very well understood. It's kind of like the word goy, Gentile, that people don't understand the word goy. Well, this is similar. This is the word ger. And people don't really understand what a ger is. They think it's like a Gentile, or they think it's a convert, or they don't know what it is. So we're going to look at this word ger. And the reason is that the Torah portion, Vayashev, which means, and he sat or he dwelt, Yashev is kind of like this word ger. In fact, there's the word ger and Toshav are put together. And Toshav is from the word Yoshev. It's the same word. And it means to dwell or to sit. But the ger is separate from Toshav, but they're linked. So I want to get some clarity on ger and Ger Toshav. So the name of the teaching is Get in Touch with Your Inner Ger. Because everybody who's a believer, Jews and Gentiles, all believers have an inner ger. That's your what they call your spiritual man or your spirit man. It's your ger. And it's the part that will be, it's the part of you that is awaiting the kingdom. That's what the ger is. It's the guy inside of you or the girl inside of you that is awaiting for that day to come, for the day of the Lord to come. That's what the ger is. So we're going to be in Genesis chapter 37. But before we read Genesis 37, I want to read the New Testament passage that makes this make sense. It's like whoever wrote Hebrews, I think it was Paul, but I don't know. Whoever wrote Hebrews was teaching from this concept of the ger. And this is what he said about it. So this is what I'm going to say about it. Hebrews 11, 8 through 16. By faith, Abraham, when he was called, listened by going out to a place which he was to receive for an inheritance. And he left, not knowing where he was going. By faith, he lived as a sojourner, that's the word ger, in the land of promise as foreign, living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, fellow heirs of the same promise, because he was, and he did this is why he did this. He did it because he was looking for a city, the city which has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. These, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, died in faith without receiving the promises, but having seen, they saw and welcomed them, plural, from a distance. So, by faith, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob wandered around living in tents. Why? Because they saw into the future and they saw this city coming that was going to belong to them. They were sojourners, that's the word ger, and temporary dwellers, that's the word toshav, on the earth. For those who say such things make it clear that they are seeking a country of their own, but as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore, God has prepared a city for them. Now, that is what we're supposed to be doing as believers. We're supposed to not feel comfortable here. We're supposed to feel comfortable in a time that isn't here yet, which people say is heaven, but is not heaven. It's the kingdom. And that's what Abraham and Isaac and Jacob were looking for, which is why they were a ger in the first place. So, get in touch with your inner ger. Here's the Torah portion. We're only going to read basically 1 or 2 verses. Now Jacob lived or dwelt, Yoshev, dwelt in the land where his father had lived as a ger, not as a toshav, but as a ger. But he was a toshav. So the word Toshav and Ger, which I'll show you how it says that Abraham lived as a Toshav. That Ger and Toshav are linked together, and I'm going to show you why. But he lived like this in the land of Canaan. Jacob lived like this, whatever this is, a Ger Toshav, in the land of Canaan. And immediately after that it says, these are the records of the generations of Jacob. Joseph, when he was 17 years of age. And it launches into the story of Joseph, but it calls it the generations, the records of the generations of Jacob. Now this phrase, now Jacob lived in the land where his father had lived as a ger, this is what it says in Hebrew. Vayashev Yaakov be'eretz meguri. Meguri, same word as ger. Meguri, which by the way, I never heard this word. Never paid attention to it. I even wrote a song with it in it, but never really paid attention to this word. Meguri. Be'eretz meguri aviv, his father's, be'eretz Canaan, of the land of Canaan. So Jacob dwelt or lived or sat in the land where his father had lived as a ger, meguri. So that's what we're going to be looking at, the word meguri and ger. So a lot of times the Bible will translate this word as stranger. And I would say it too. We're supposed to live as strangers and aliens. The stranger that lives among you, the strangers, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob were strangers. I translated it like that too. I'm never going to do that again because it's wrong. And it's big time wrong. So we have to look at the word ger and toshav. What is this in Judaism, the ger toshav? Now, there are websites you can go to and look up all the problems with the Ger Toshav and how to translate it and what it means and what it doesn't mean and all the translational problems that people have with it. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to look at the Bible, a few verses about the Ger Toshav, or the Ger by itself. And what I've come up with is, what many rabbis have come up with, is the phrase resident alien. In America, we have resident aliens. People who work here and live here, but they're not citizens yet. Or they never will be citizens. If they don't do that properly, they're called illegal aliens because it's not legal what they're doing, which is to reside here without being a resident citizen, a resident alien. So they're just alien. So this whole word resident is very, very important. That means you've got the permission to reside, to be a toshav. All right, Exodus 12, 43 through 45 says the Passover offering, a resident, a toshav, and a hired laborer may not eat of it. So the resident alien, the toshav, doesn't do Judaism. He doesn't keep the Pesach. So he may or may not do Judaism. It's up to him. But he is not to eat of Pesach offering. That means go and make the sacrifice. Leviticus 25:6, the land's yield of the sabbatical year shall be yours to eat, yours, Israel, Israeli citizens, and the toshav who is a ger among you. Now I translate that as, and the resident who sojourns among you. And some translate it as the stranger. The resident who's a stranger among you. So I'm going to show you why that's not a good idea to say stranger in a few moments. Leviticus 25:35 says, you shall strengthen him, that means give him money, the sojourner, or the resident, the ger or the toshav. So both the ger and the toshav, if they're in Israel, you are to treat them nice. You're to treat them good. You're to teach them Judaism. If they want to do Judaism, that's fine. If they don't, that's fine. But they are to be treated equally with you. Now, this is a big deal because this is about the role of Jews and Gentiles in God's body. The way God set it up in Israel is the way he set it up in his body. Israel is a picture of God's body, and they should match perfectly. And God still calls them a ger and a toshav. He doesn't call them Jews. He doesn't call them Israelis. He calls them a resident, a toshav, or a ger, a sojourner. In the New Testament, when you come to the New Testament, it calls them straight out Gentiles. It doesn't call them Christians, it calls them Gentiles. And they are in the body of Messiah as Gentiles doing Judaism. That's why this is important. This is important because we want to find out what a ger is, because it's going to define for us who God's people are. Leviticus 25:40. Like a laborer or a resident, a toshav, he shall be with you until the Jubilee year. He shall work with you. So for 50 years, up until whenever the Jubilee comes, could be 2 years away, could be 50 years away. That's how long the laborer, the resident, is paid by you. Leviticus 25:45. Also from among the children of the residents, or the toshavim, who dwell, who are a ger with you. Notice that most of these verses are about money in Leviticus 25. Because how we treat, this is not about social justice. This is how in the body we are fellow citizens, is what it's called. That means we are all equal citizens. We're paid the same amount by God for our service. That's what this is about. Both the Jew and the Gentile are equal in God's body. But it's in Israel, doing Judaism, in a Jewish world, in a Jewish environment. All right, Leviticus 25:47. If the means of a ger who is a toshav among you, and then it talks about, how you pay them properly. If they don't have the money to do something, you have to help them out. So, over and over again, it links ger with toshav. A ger is a sojourner, a toshav is a resident. Sojourner or alien, not a stranger. And here's why I say not a stranger. We got one more verse first. Numbers 35:15. For the children of Israel, the resident alien, that's the ger, and the dweller, the toshav, among you. So, there's basically three groups of people, which is really two. There's the Jews and the Gentiles. But these Gentiles have come into Israel to live as citizens or as resident aliens. And they are to be treated like the rest of the Jews in Israel. They're equal. Now, so we translate sojourner or resident alien. Here's why not the word stranger. Because it is a completely different concept. The stranger in Hebrew is zar or zara. Not zara like seed. Zara like seed. That's a different word. This is zara or zar, and it means a stranger, a foreigner, an adulterer. This is the word for adulterer in Hebrew. Azara. Azara, sorry. From zur, to turn aside, to depart, to turn from the way, unlawful, profane, or idolatrous. In Judaism, this is how Messianic Jews are viewed and what we're called. We're called idolaters. We're called adulterers. We're called, they say we've turned aside, we've departed. So that in the Talmud, and this is not a bad thing, it's a good thing, there is an entire tractate called Avodah Zarah, which means Avodah, service or worship, Zarah, idolatrous. And a lot of it is about Christianity. Now, you can take that however you want, but it's fantastic that we have a tractate in the Talmud telling us what constitutes idolatrous worship. And there's lots of details to it. It's not simple. It's very detailed and very complicated. But they put Messianic Jews into that Avodah Zarah. So a Jew, an Orthodox Jew, or a Hasidic Jew, or a traditional Jew would look at me and my life and what I teach and say that I do Avodah Zarah, idolatrous worship. So you can take that or leave it. That's why we don't use the word stranger. because a stranger is an idolater, straight up idolater. But a sojourner is different. A sojourner is somebody who comes in and is there with goodwill, not as an idolater. If it's somebody from the Gentiles coming into Israel, they're coming not to do damage, they're coming to learn and to get to know God. Now, the word magur, which is that word we started with in the Torah portion, magur, it means lodging, a temporary abode, by extension, a residence. A resident alien. Ger Toshav, the word residence, a dwelling, a pilgrimage. I don't really like that word. Pilgrimage, to sojourn, to be a stranger. Now, I put stranger there just because that's how they translate it. A lot of the Jacinius and the Strongs and whatnot, they put stranger. But good translation is resident alien. A magur is a resident alien. Now remember, it said Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were gerim, resident aliens, and toshavim, dwellers or dwellers in the land. Magor, or magur, same word, from the sense of fearing, of fright, fear, terror, and horror. Now, I had a whole bunch of verses about this, but I scrapped them. I thought, I don't want to go into that. I just find it strange that it's the same word, that a temporary dwelling, an abode, a residence, temporary residence, is the same word as horror or terror or fear. And I suppose it's because the root is gur, which is a primitive root, to turn aside from the road. Kind of like a stranger, kind of like a zur, to turn aside from the road for a lodging. But this is to turn aside from the road, not to do bad things, but to look for a home. And so you're like a stranger, kind of, and you're scared. You have fear. What's it like in this new place? It's bizarre. It's strange. I don't know the culture. So I suppose that's why these words are linked together. So it means sojourn as a guest. They'll call aliens from any nation as a guest. They'll give them a guest permit. It's like a green card for a resident alien. Also to shrink, fear as in a strange place. Also to gather for hostility as afraid, to abide, to assemble, to be afraid, to dwell, to fear. So it starts mixing these two concepts together. But really, gur, to turn aside, to be a resident, a wanderer. Now, the whole concept of the wandering Jew comes in here. Since the time of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the Jews have wandered. They didn't just wander in the wilderness. They didn't just wander during that 40-year span, or 38 of those years. And really, they only wandered for 2 of those years. But during that span of time, the Jews didn't wander just then. The wandering Jew, there have been many, many multitudes of books written about the wandering Jew since the time of Yeshua, 1st century, to our time. During these 2,000 years, the Jews have wandered the whole earth. But before that, the Jews were wanderers as well. Why? Because we're gerim. We're supposed to wander. We're supposed to be sojourners, wandering, and not have a permanent place here. That's the whole point of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob being gerim, that they had no permanent place. Now we're going to look at the word magur as a sojourner. Genesis 17:8, I will give to you and to your seed after you the land where you are sojourning, where you're a magur, in all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession. So here's where it gets weird. And it's hard to follow this, so I'm going to try to make it as clear as I can. The temporary nature of being a ger or a magur is the permanent nature of the believer. At Sukkot, we build a sukkah, which is an impermanent dwelling. We dwell in there, we yoshev, we sit and dwell in there for 7 days. So the impermanent nature of a sukkah is where we live or dwell. That's the word Toshav, or Yoshev. So Ger and Yoshev, or Toshav, are always linked together. One is permanent, one is not. That's why they're linked. Because Abraham and Isaac and Jacob wandered the whole Middle East looking for a place that wasn't even in the Middle East. It was in the future. 4,000 years in the future. And they saw it, and they looked for it, and they went looking for it. Wandering around looking for it. So the permanence, our permanence, which is the kingdom, is only attained by being impermanent. So that's why it says here, you're going to be a magur, a sojourner. I'm giving you the land for an everlasting, a permanent possession. Just not that land. Future. A future. That land, but future. All right, so this is kind of confusing, that the impermanence is our permanence. And that's what really the crux of this teaching is. That David saw it, and he wrote about it extensively. He said that I am impermanently in your house, so I can permanently be in your house. So it can get confusing if you don't understand this. Genesis 28:4, and I give you the blessing of Abraham to you and to your seed, that you may inherit the land where you're a ger, magur, which God gave to Abraham. Now he's talking to Jacob here. Genesis 47:9 is also, now here he's talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob said to Pharaoh, the days of the years of my sojourn, megurai, my sojourn, are 130 years, and have not attained to the life of my fathers in the days of their sojourning, megurehem, their sojourning, which is Abraham and Isaac, and now Jacob. So Abraham and Isaac and Jacob were gerim. Exodus 6:4, I've established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land of their megurehem, their sojourning. This is talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's Exodus 6:4. Now, over and over again, what it's doing is it's setting up this pattern that Abraham was a ger, Isaac was a ger, Jacob was a ger. And so they get a permanent dwelling in the future. That's the pattern, that's the picture it's teaching us. Now we're going to look at ger as sojourner or alien. Genesis 15:3, God said to Avram, know for certain that your seed will be ger. Now it uses the singular, not plural, because seed is singular. Your seed, singular. This is talking about the Messiah. It says this in Galatians chapter 3, I think it's verse 16. It says, not plural seeds, one seed, which is the Messiah. Know for certain that your seed will be ger in the land, not theirs, plural. Isn't that strange? They will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. So they're a ger in the land that is not theirs. That's why they're a ger, because they're a resident alien. Exodus 2:22, and she, Moshe's wife, bore a son, and he, Moshe, called his name Ger Shom. Sham is there. Ger Sham. For he said, I have been a ger there, in a foreign land. So he named it. So Moshe also saw that he was a ger. Exodus 22:21, you shall not oppress a ger, nor torment him, for you were gerim in the land of Egypt. You know what it feels like? This is not about social justice. This is about treating the Gentile as a fellow inheritor of the blessings of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which aren't here yet, which is not just the Messiah, the kingdom. That's what this is about. You shall not oppress a ger. Now think about what this means to the Jewish people. You shall not push the Gentile who's coming to you away. You don't push them away. You invite them in. You treat them like they're just like you. Why? That way you can teach them about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You can Judaize them. You can Judaize them and teach them about God. That's how you don't oppress the ger. You invite them into God. You don't become like them. You make them become like you. That's how you don't oppress them. Because you were Gerim, you know what it feels like to be in this weird place, and you don't know the culture, and they got all these weird ways. Well, somebody's going to have to teach you the weird ways for you to know the weird ways. Deuteronomy 5:14, the seventh day is a Shabbat of the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, and then it says your donkey or your animals, your male or your female servant, or the ger in your gates. So in other words, the ger also does Judaism along with you. Now they don't have to. They don't have to do Judaism. There's certain things they have to do, like this, like Shabbat. They can't break Shabbat, but it's their choice how much they choose to do. The more you invite them in, the more you Judaize them, the more they'll probably want to do. The more you push them away and separate them from Judaism, not from God, not from Christ, from Judaism, which gets them to know God, they'll probably be like, who needs that? And that's not good. So you want to invite them in. Leviticus 17:12. This is a strange verse. So here's what I want to talk about. Here's the crux of the matter. The name of the teaching is, get in touch with your inner ger. Well, that's to a Jew, that's kind of offensive. I'm not a ger, I'm a Jew. I'm a freeborn Israeli Jew. No, you too are a ger. Abraham was a ger, Isaac was a ger, Jacob was a ger. So why can't you be? We're still wandering. We still don't have the kingdom, so we're still looking for it. Now, here's why I say get in touch with your inner ger. In other words, he's down inside of you. What gives me the right to say that? Here's why I say it. Leviticus 17:12. I said to the sons of Israel, no person among you may eat blood, nor may any stranger who resides, a ger, a resident alien who resides among you, eat blood. So this is another thing that Gentiles who come into Jewish society or into Israel, they can't eat blood. That's one of the things they cannot do. So it says in Hebrew, it's a very strange way it says in Hebrew. It says Hagar, betochechem. Betochechem. I keep flipping this around. Hagar, betochechem. Hagar, betochechem. Obviously, you can see the same word repeated twice. Hagar and Hagar. Well, Hagar, the resident alien, and then it says it again, the resident alien, betochechem. Now I got my words kind of mixed up here, like they're not aligned underneath the Hebrew, but the first word, Hagar, underneath it says the sojourner or temporary dweller. You can translate it both ways. And under the second word, Hagar, it's the same word, but it's a slightly different form. So it means the alien or temporarily dwells, an adjective. Temporarily dwell, or sorry, a verb. Temporarily dwells. So that's the second word, Hagar. And then it says betochechem, which it should not say. It says betochechem, which is in your midst, but it really is inside you. Inside of you. There's a ger that is gering, dwelling, or temporarily dwelling inside of you. I'm going to prove my point, but I'm going to go back to the verse in Leviticus first. I said to the sons of Israel, no person among you, no soul among you, may eat blood, nor may any sojourner who is a temporarily dwelling inside of you. In other words, I don't want you physically eating blood. Why? Because the one inside of you shouldn't do that. It's the wrong picture. It's the wrong picture. It's not like a commandment and a law. It's the wrong picture because your permanent you, your permanent self, my permanent me, whoever that is not going to eat blood in the kingdom. That blood is to make atonement for your soul, your nefesh. And it says, no soul among you shall eat. Well, who's the soul? The soul is your ger. The soul is the ger. It's the permanent us that's wandering this stupid earth that's upside down and backwards, upside down and inside out, this world. And we're wandering this stupid, ridiculous, horrible planet, which is amazing, don't get me wrong, but this planet is horrible because of humans, because we do everything wrong. And we're wandering around, trying to figure stuff out, trying to do things right. But that guy or girl inside of us who's eternal is so frustrated by all of it. That one should not eat blood because it's the wrong picture. That blood is for atonement. So here, I'm going to prove to you that guy or girl is inside of you. How do we know this? Because of the word betochem. It says, in your midst, or I say inside of you, betochechem. It's the plural form of you, and then the word inside. It says, va'asu li mikdash v'shachanti betocham. Same word in Exodus 25, verse 8, which says, I'm going to show you all the furniture of the tabernacle and the tabernacle itself and the garments of the priest and the priesthood. I'm going to show it all to you. And you make everything according to the picture that I've shown you. Why? Because I want them to build me a sanctuary so I can dwell inside of them. It's the same word. So if God is dwelling betocham, then the ger is dwelling betochechem. It's the same word. I want to dwell inside you. I want the ger is dwelling inside you. You have an inner ger. If you're Jewish or Gentile, if you're a believer, even if you're not a believer, and God has called you to know Him, and you're going to be a believer, you have an inner ger that's wandering this earth looking for a permanent home. And you got to feed that inner ger. How do you feed the inner ger? Judaism. You don't feed the inner ger blood, because that is the wrong picture. You feed that inner ger with the proper pictures. So you have a resident alien, a sojourner, a wanderer, an impermanent citizen inside of you. Now here's David. This is David sitting in front of the ark. He should have been burned up by God when he did this. But instead, God not only promised him that he was going to bless him, but he promised him the coming of the Messiah. He promised him the continuation of his kingdom forever. He promised him the kingdom itself when he came and sat in front of the ark, which broke the law in many, many points. I've done this teaching several times. But in Psalm 15:1, it says this, who will dwell, David says this, who will dwell in your tent? So my question is it impermanently dwelling or permanently dwelling? Is it like a sukkah or like the temple? Is it something that's flimsy that you can knock down, or is it something that never goes away? Yes. Remember, they are the same thing. Who will dwell in your tent? And the word is yagur, same word as ger and magur. And it says in Hebrew, mi yagur ba'ohalcha. Ohalcha. Ahalcha, sorry. Ba'ahalcha. Ba'ahalcha. Ahal is ohel, which is tent. So, me, who, yagur, will dwell, ba'ahalcha, in your tent. That's the question. And the answer is those who have clean hands and a pure heart, who basically do Judaism and worship God properly. Those are the ones who are going to dwell in your tent. But it's the word yagur, impermanent, sojourn. Who's going to sojourn in your tent? But remember, ger and toshav are always linked. Ger, impermanent, toshav, permanent, a permanent house. Psalm 61:5 proves it. It says, David saying, I will agura impermanently dwell in your tent forever. Olamim. So it links the impermanent with the permanent, and basically says they're the same thing. That I will dwell in your house impermanently forever. Isn't that strange? It says, Agura ba'ahalcha olamim. And actually it's not just forever. That would be le'olam. It's olamim, which is forevers, plural. Forevers. Olamim, worlds, plurals. Plural, worlds. Like we have an olam hazeh, this world, and olam haba, the world that is to come. So I will dwell impermanently in your house forever. The sukkah is the temple. Our impermanence is our permanence. They are the same thing. If you've experienced one, you've experienced the other. That's the entire purpose of Judaism. That they're impermanent models. They're little, Judaism is just an impermanent model of that which is permanent. So I've written a song about this, and it has these words. The chorus says, Agura ba'al halcha, which we just read, Veseter kanafecha, Olamim, hallelujah. Agura ba'ahalcha, I will dwell impermanently in your tent. Veseter kanafecha, and hidden in your wings, Olamim, forever. Hallelujah. Sing to the King under his wings, there to find shelter forever. There in your home, never alone, and seeking your way forever. Adulterer, Olamim, hallelujah, hallelujah. Lovely your place, my soul even faints for the courts where your presence is dwelling. The birds have a home, a nest of their own, by your altar where worship's ascending. A shelter for me to dwell here with thee, in your shadows is where I take my rest. Say to the Lord, my trust, my reward, you are my refuge, my fortress. Agura ba'alcha, veseter kanafecha, olamim, hallelujah, hallelujah. I will dwell in the tent of your wings forever. I will dwell in the tent of your wings forever. I will dwell in the tent of your wings forever. Hallelujah. Agura ba'ahalcha, olam veseter kanafecha, olamim, hallelujah, hallelujah. Agura ba'ahalcha, v'seter kanafecha, olamim, hallelujah. I will dwell in your tent and hidden under your wings forever. The impermanence is the permanence. That which is a picture, that which we do impermanently in Judaism is a picture of that which is eternal. So, the Ger inside of us is going to dwell in the kingdom. Not this rotting skin sack. Our soul, our eternal, whatever it is. And by the way, in Judaism, nobody knows how to define the soul. And there are a lot of songs that are sung that says, "Oh soul, whatever you are," stuff like that. One of my favorite songs says literally that, "Oh soul, whatever you are." And then it sings about her, because soul is female. So that Ger is going to live in the kingdom forever. And back to our original verse. Now Jacob lived in the land, dwelt permanently to Yoshev, lived in the land where his father had lived as a Ger, in the land of Canaan. Back to that verse in Hebrews. Now I want you to look at this illustration I did. On the top it says Yerushalayim Me'olah. That means Jerusalem above. And then in the middle it says Hamlucha, and that means the kingdom. Now, if you go to modern Hebrew, they don't say Hamlucha, they say Hamemlucha. But in Obadiah, the very last verse, it says, "And the kingdom shall be the Lord's," and it's this word Hamlucha. I also typed into Google Translate, the kingdom will be the Lord's, and it used the word Hamemlucha. It did not use this word Hamlucha. So I know that it's modern Hebrew that they have up on Google Translate. It's not biblical Hebrew. Biblical Hebrew says Hamlucha, Melucha. Melech is king. Ha is the kingdom. Notice it's feminine. So up on top you have this Jerusalem up above, and it matches the Jerusalem that's down below. But in the kingdom, it's 1,000 years of that which is above coming down to earth. And then that which is above swallows up everything in the universe and just becomes what the world knows as heaven. But it's Jerusalem. So that's Hamlucha, and that's what the Ger is waiting for. And here's the problem, should be looking for, but they're not. Let me say it this way. The typical Christian says this: when you die, you go to heaven or you go to hell. I mean, everybody says that, right? You go to heaven or you go to hell. It's the most common thing said in the whole earth. When you die, you go to heaven or you go to hell. It's not true. When we die, we die. And our soul awaits the resurrection where we will enter the kingdom. If we are not righteous, that will not happen. We will not go into the kingdom as righteous souls. So we don't go to heaven or hell. Heaven doesn't really exist until after the kingdom. The kingdom is God's day, it's God's Shabbat, it's 1,000 years long, from the year 6001 to 7001, and then comes heaven. But it's the New Jerusalem. It's not Rome, it's Jerusalem forever. That's what heaven is. So that kingdom, Hamlucha, is what Abraham was searching for, and Isaac was then searching for, and then Jacob. Why? Why would Isaac and Jacob look for it? Because Abraham taught them. How did Abraham know about it? Remember, it says in Genesis 26:5 that Abraham did the Torah. He did Judaism, and that's why God blessed Isaac, because Abraham did Judaism. Well, who taught him Judaism? The Holy Spirit. Hebrews 11:8-16. By faith, That means understanding. With understanding, Abraham, when he was called, listened by going out to a place which he was to receive for an inheritance. And it wasn't the land of Canaan. It was the kingdom. It was just in physical form, Canaan, which he was to receive for an inheritance. And he left. He didn't even know where he was going. By faith, by the same understanding, he lived as a Ger in the land of promise as foreign, as if he was foreign, because he was foreign. Living in tents. Now this is important. Dwelling, Ger Toshav, in tents. Not in Sukkot, not in houses, Beitim, in tents. Why? Because I will dwell in your tent forever. And they were acting that out. It wasn't just a cultural thing. Well, that's what Jews lived in. That's what Arabs lived in. No. They because this is in Hebrews 11 talking about what they did by faith. They lived in tents by faith. This is not a small thing. Living in tents with Isaac and Jacob, fellow heirs of the same promise. He was looking for the city which has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. Why? Who said? Where does this come from? Because he saw it by faith. Now, there's a whole bunch of verses that I can show that prove that in the Torah, but that is what I'm doing over time. I'm breaking it down in one verse at a time to show how Abraham saw the kingdom. So, they were fellow heirs of the same person. They were looking for the city that has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. These died in understanding and faith without receiving those promises, but having seen and welcomed them from a distance. Why don't believers see the kingdom like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob did? This is what has bothered me for 42 years. Why don't Christians see what Jews saw? They're shooting for something different. Let's go to heaven. I want to go to heaven. I want to accept the Lord Jesus Christ so I can go to heaven. That's not what you shoot for. They're shooting for something different than Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob did. They were shooting for a city, and we know it's Jerusalem. They were shooting for this city that God was the architect of and the builder of, and they welcomed it from a distance, having confessed that they were Gerim, sojourners, and Toshavim on the earth. So there it is. They said they were Gerim, Toshav. They were Ger Toshav. They were Gentiles who came into a foreign place, not Canaan. They were Gentiles who came into a foreign place and got to know God. So what's the foreign place? Canaan? That had the same kind of idolatry that they came from, that Abraham came from. So it's got to be talking about some different place. Yes, it's talking about the city that isn't here yet, the kingdom. That's where they wandered. Now remember, it says in Hebrews chapter 3 and chapter 4 that Moses, when he died, he didn't lead the Israel into the land of Canaan, that Joshua did that. And it says Joshua was not leading them into a land, but into a day, the day of the Lord. And that was the rest that they were looking for. That's what Abraham and Isaac and Jacob were looking for. That is not what Christianity is looking for. So we've got a huge, huge problem. And that's what I want you to see on this Hanukkah. That there is an enormous problem, that one path is leading away from what God showed us, which is heaven and hell. And one path is leading toward what God showed us, which is the kingdom. You got to pick your path. Christianity will tell you one thing, and I'll show you why, and Judaism will teach you another. And then it says, right after the emboldened part of the verse. For those who say such things make it clear that they are seeking a country just like Israel was, just like Joshua was trying to lead them into, a different country, not the land of Canaan. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore, God has prepared a city for them. There it is. It says it over and over again. It's not heaven. It's whatever Jerusalem is. There's a Jerusalem below, Yerushalayim Mata, and a Jerusalem above, Yerushalayim Me'olah. And they match. Well, that's where Judaism is done. Now, in 1 Peter 2:11, it says this. But before I read this, I want you to read what I found. There's thousands of things I could have chosen from, but I chose this one. It's from Life Beautiful. It's a magazine in Christianity. It's called Life Beautiful. It says this: as Christians, we are called to live in this world as sojourners, passing through on our way to our eternal home that holds our true citizenship. It is meant to feel strange to us. The problem is that most days this world doesn't feel strange at all. Immersing ourselves in this reality, we lose any feeling of culture shock. We become desensitized to what initially felt abnormal and bizarre and began to accept it as normal. We slowly conform to this world instead of God's word, and this broken world feels less and less strange. And you might like those words. I think that is disgusting, because everything there is true, but nobody in Christianity does it. Everybody in Christianity is living in a culture which is the culture of this world. There's no difference. They are exactly the same. Why is Christmas done in every nation on the planet? Because that's in the Christian world. And it's wrong. It's evil. It's disgusting. And every Christian I know bewails this world. Oh, we feel like strangers in this horrible world. Well, then do something different, for God's sake. If you don't like it, do something different. Do Judaism, and you'll really feel what you're supposed to feel. You only feel bad in this world because they're not doing the laws and commandments you want them to do. But the truth is, you're living exactly like the rest of the world is. If you're doing Christmas or Easter or church on Sunday, or I had to write things down here because I don't even know them. Communion, that's from pagan practices. Hymns, they all sound the same. They sound like Germany in that 1700s. Why is that? And then prayers, all the prayers in the name of Jesus, amen. And then the things that are prayed for in Christianity are all wrong. They're all upside down and backwards. Because they're not rooted in the Torah. And so, I mean, I know I get passionate about this, and I don't want you to think I'm, anti-Christian and yelling at Christians, because I'm not. It's just that I want to see believers have the same understanding of God that God wants us to have. And that's only found in Judaism. So, if you are living in the culture that surrounds us, the culture that surrounds us was born and birthed in what's called Hellenism. Now that Hellenism has completely, I'd say conservatively 95% absorbed into Christianity. Now those are my words. I'm saying 95% because I've been around for 42 years and watching and listening and paying attention. I might be wrong, but I know this, that if you want to know what Hellenism is, go to church. You'll find out real quick. If you go to church, you better open your eyes, because most of what is done should irritate the heck out of you, but it doesn't. It blesses your soul. And this is a problem. If Hellenism blesses you, one of two things is happening. Either you don't know what Hellenism is, or your heart's in the wrong place. I can't say anything about your heart, but I can tell you this. You need to find out what Hellenism is and the difference between it and Judaism. Now this festival that we just started, Hanukkah is all about the war, and it used to be a war, between Hellenism and Judaism. In my book, when all the pictures are restored, it's the second biggest chapter. The first biggest chapter is pictures, because that's where I lay out the entire foundation and understanding of Judaism, what the purposes of it is, and that it is nothing but metaphors, pictures, types, patterns, shadows of heavenly things. But the second biggest chapter is Hanukkah, and yet it's not a biblical festival. But it is a biblical festival, very much so. It was prophesied in one of the biggest prophecies in the Bible, which is Daniel chapter 10. And every detail of it of the story that we commemorate at Hanukkah is in that prophecy, and in many, many other prophecies too, but that's the big one. And there is an enormous difference between Hellenistic Christianity and biblical Judaism. An enormous difference. When I speak, Christians hate when I speak. I'm never invited to teach in churches because they hate the way I speak. And then one will tell another and tell another and tell another, and word gets around, and nobody wants to hear me speak because I'm a Jew and I'm teaching Jewish stuff, but it's about Yeshua, Jesus. So I have Christians all the time say to me, now you believe that Jesus is Christ, right? You believe in Jesus Christ, right? And it just confuses my head so much. I don't know how to answer them because Jesus Christ is not even a thing. It's Jesus the Christ or Yeshua the Messiah. But anyway, they, after talking about how Judaism shows Yeshua, they'll ask me, you believe in Jesus, right? And all I can think of is, you couldn't hear a word I said. Which I understand. If you're in Hellenism, you cannot hear the words that are Jewish. You can't. You have to retool the way that you think and the way that you see and the way that you hear. So what I'm saying is this, that there would be no Christmas, there would be no Easter, there'd be no church anywhere, and especially not meeting on Sunday. There'd be no communion, there'd be no hymns, there'd be no prayers, and by the way, no politics. And don't say, yeah, but they do the same kind of politics in Israel. They're not Jews. They're not biblical Jews. They're Jews in Israel. They're not biblical. They don't follow the biblical patterns that God set up. They will in the kingdom, believe me. But my point is this. Hellenism has infected the culture like a cancer, like COVID. It has just spread like fire. Why? Because of Edom. Edom is Rome. Edom is Hellenism. And they were the controlling power on the planet. And so, this image of Jesus Christ, which is here, you can see the image of Jesus Christ here, the third picture, next to a picture of Yeshua. God only knows what he looked like, but at least he's a Jew here. So here's Yeshua next to Jesus Christ. And always, without exception, there's one thing that it all comes down to. You're going to hate this. I don't know why Christians hate this so much. But it's such a simple thing. Hair. It all comes down to hair. You're not allowed to have long hair in Judaism. You're not allowed to. It's the wrong picture. And so God says, several times, you're not to have long hair. And in fact, in the Talmud, it tells how many stripes you're supposed to give a Jew who doesn't cut his hair and keep his hair short, trimmed. But you're not allowed to trim your beard. You're supposed to have a big beard. So this image came from somewhere. This image of, quote, Jesus Christ came from somewhere. It came right out of Hellenism. And it took about 200 years to build this image. It developed. The hair is what developed. Now in my chapter on Hanukkah, when all the pictures are restored, I go through very detailed. I show in coins the development of what happened to the hair and the beard, and it's really detailed. And you have to understand it in order to understand what you're looking at when you see this picture of Jesus Christ. Everything on the hair and beard is very specific, and it means something. But I'm going to just distill it down real quick here. This image was, it took about 300 years to get there. By the time it was solidified, in the time of Yeshua, actually after the time of Yeshua, about the year 100, that's when it was solidified. It was solidified with this guy named Sojourner. Now these are Syrian Greek kings, just like Antiochus Epiphanes, the bad guy in the Hanukkah story. He was the third or fourth of the Syrian Greek kings in the story. He's Antiochus the fourth. But he's the third or fourth in the story. And it just kept going. It kept going. The same Syrian Greek line of kings kept going. And it ended with this guy, Sojourner. What does he look like? I mean, that's Jesus Christ incarnate. And then a frontal view was another Syrian Greek king, Reumatalkis, around the same time. That's Jesus Christ. So, without understanding all the details about the hair and the beard, I'm just distilling it, making it super simple, so hopefully you can understand. This didn't come out of a vacuum, this image of Jesus. It didn't come out of a vacuum. It was created. It was planned. It was planned over a period of a couple hundred years. Sojourner looked nothing like this. He was fat, bald, ugly. Reumatalkis, same thing. But they are not Sojourner and Reumatalkis. They are Zeus. They are Sojourner as Zeus, Reumatalkis as Zeus. This started at Hanukkah. Now, this verse in 1 Peter chapter 2, I'm going to go back to it and read it. I urge you as foreigners, gerim, aliens, and now I put strangers, because that's what most verses use the word stranger. It is not stranger. It's resident alien, toshavim, to abstain from fleshly lusts which wage war against the soul. So now it has used both words, ger and toshav, and then said, basically, don't live like the culture that you're around. Flee from fleshly lusts, because they wage war against your soul, the one that lives forever. So why does it say toshavim and gerim here? Why? Because it's only by looking at ourselves as not belonging to the culture and living a different culture. And remember, in that, Christians, they bemoan, we just don't feel part of this culture. Then why are you doing the things in the culture? You can't have it both ways. But in the first century, when Peter was writing to believers, these people did Judaism. And he's telling these people that did Judaism, you are a weirdo because you live in you're doing this weird stuff, living as a ger and a toshav, like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob did, doing Judaism. So don't get wrapped up in that lust that absorbs this whole culture that's around us. We're in the same boat right now. Rome and Greece has come back with a vengeance. Here's another verse. It's basically the same thing, 2 Corinthians 10:3. For though we walk in the flesh. Now, listen to me. If you're a Christian doing Christianity, you are walking according to the flesh, not according to the Spirit. Not really. I'm not telling you the Spirit isn't talking to you. I'm not saying that you don't do, righteous things. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that you are just like the surrounding culture. So am I when I'm not doing Judaism. So am I. I'm walking according to my flesh, my carne, my meat. We all do. During the times that we're doing Judaism, then we're not. Even though we walk in the flesh, even though we're physical here, We don't wage battle according to that flesh. You got to do it a different way. You're not going to do it by praying, in the name of Jesus Christ. It's not going to happen. It's not going to work. We don't battle according to the flesh because the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but powerful from heaven for the destroying of fortresses, destroying arguments and all arrogance raised against the knowledge of God. Don't think about Harvard professors who teach their children not to believe in God. Not what it means. It means Jews in a Gentile world, or Gentiles living, amongst Jews, doing Judaism, getting to know God, living in a Gentile world. You can't fight whatever fights against that with the fleshly ways of this world, which is, unfortunately, Christmas, Easter, Sunday church, communion, hymns, prayers, politics, and all the other stuff that is in Hellenistic Christianity. You know that better than I would. I mean, I had to write it down. That's how unfamiliar I am with it. But you would know better than me. All of it cannot fight against Hellenism, because it is Hellenism. You have to fight it from heavenly ways. And what are the heavenly ways? The Torah. You have to fight the arrogant arguments against God's ways, which is Judaism, with Jewish ways. You can't fight it any other way. This guy here doesn't fight against Hellenism. This guy is Hellenism incarnate. He's not Jesus Christ. Please forgive me. He's not Yeshua the Messiah. He is Jesus Christ. Not Jesus the Christ. Jesus Christ. Whatever that is. That's who that is. But he really started as Antiochus in the Hanukkah story. This is what they did. This is what he did. This guy, Antiochus Epiphanes, who's the bad guy in the Hanukkah story, this man outlawed Judaism in Israel. And I mean outlawed it, made it punishable by death. He put his image as Zeus. Now, don't think he looked like this. He didn't. I don't know what he looked like, but he didn't look like the image that he erected, and that is on all of his coins. He erected an image of himself as Zeus on the altar of God, offered a pig on the altar, and made the priests drink the broth from that sacrificed pig. Now, when I say he outlawed Judaism, if you became circumcised, you would be killed. If you read the Torah in Hebrew, you would be killed. I mean, literally outlawed Judaism, which is where we're moving toward more and more in this culture, in this country. This guy, Antiochus Epiphanes means God in flesh, so I hate to call him that, Antiochus the Fourth. The same one who outlawed Judaism, now follow this, the same guy who outlawed Judaism, who saw himself as Zeus, the king of the gods, the Greek gods, is Jesus Christ. That's the image. That's where the image came from. It came from Antiochus. That's where the image of Jesus Christ came from. Now, you can do with that information what you want. I think that it is foolish to not do something about it. You're going to have to change the way you're thinking. You should never, ever, ever, ever say Jesus Christ. If you want to say Jesus the Christ and speak English, that's fine, whatever. It's from Greek. But not Jesus Christ. That's not a name. That's Antiochus Epiphanes, not Yeshua the Messiah. Now, I hear in my head all kinds of Christian arguments and Christians going crazy with it. I'm going to get rid of all the pictures of Jesus Christ and I'm going to rip them out of the Bible and all kinds of things. Okay, cool. But whatever. That's not even the point. The point is you need to change the way you're thinking. You need to change the way you think. You need to stop saying Jesus Christ and you need to say Jesus the Messiah if you want. Try it. See what happens. See how it changes the way you think. And start doing Judaism. And when you read the New Testament, try to figure out the Jewish context of it. Where is it coming from in the Tanakh or in the Torah, in the Old Testament? What's being quoted in the Old Testament? And then start creating a world in your mind. I know that sounds weird, but start creating a world in your mind of a Jewish world and put Yeshua in there and watch what happens in your mind. Then when you're around people who say, oh, I love Jesus Christ, we're going to do Christmas, you'll cringe. You'll just cringe. Because you'll see they don't fit. One is at war with the other. Now, I used to be a zealot, and my favorite time of year was Hanukkah. And I used to tell my people to make war on Hellenism. And I made war on Hellenism. I don't say that anymore. Because we're not supposed to make war on Hellenism. We're not supposed to accept it. We're not supposed to make war on it. We're supposed to learn the other way. Learn Judaism. But there is going to come a time that we are going to make war on Hellenism. Physically, literally make war on Hellenism. But we're not going to do it. God is. God's going to stir it up and make it happen. This is in Zechariah 9:13. And I want you to see these emboldened words. God says that in the day of the Lord, and it does put it in the day of the Lord in this passage, God says, I will bend Judah as my bow. God's going to do this. I will fill the bow with Ephraim. God will. God is going to get Ephraim, stick it in the bow of Judah, and take aim and shoot somebody and kill them. And I will stir up your son Zion against your sons Greece. And I will make you like a warrior sword. So, my point is that God is going to bring a war in the day of the Lord where we, the Jewish people, Judah, it calls it Judah, Ephraim, and Zion, God will stir us up and send us in war against Hellenism, Greece. This is what Hellenism is. Hellenism means the way of Greece. So, if you want to match what God's heart is, go into yourself and make war on Hellenism. Don't do it with other people. Do it just with you. That's what I learned. I used to teach other people to make war on Hellenism wherever they saw it. And I did the same thing. I don't do that anymore. Now I turn inward, and I want to eradicate all vestiges of Edom, Rome, Greece, and Antiochus Epiphanes from me. I want to get that off the altar and set up a true altar in the temple, in me. A true temple. Not a defiled temple that has been defiled with Hellenism. Because if you think Hellenism hasn't defiled your temple, you're wrong. It messes up the way we think. And so we end up reading the New Testament and seeing this guy in our head. Worst thing you could possibly do. All the paintings, all the pictures, tens of thousands of them, of Jesus doing this and doing that, and they all look like this guy. Why? Why do they all look like this guy? Why does he always have long hair? Well, the reason is because of Antiochus Epiphanes and the 300-year, 250-year, or thereabouts, historical story that created this image. But you're going to have to get rid of it. Got to replace it with something else. I replace it with this guy, as close as I can get. You want somebody else? Do somebody else. I don't care. But you're going to have to replace it with something, somebody. So, I mean, to me, you know, you may not think this is a big deal, but I read God says that in the kingdom, I will, I will, I will, I will, I will. You better pay attention, because he will. And what he's going to do is stir up a war between Judaism and Hellenism. So if you want to be part of that, be part of that. If you don't, you'll be swept away with all of Hellenism when the kingdom comes. All Hellenism. And again, Christmas, Easter, Sunday church, communion, hymns, prayers, and politics. And whatever else is Hellenized, it'll all be swept away by Judaism. So, that's as good as I can do about the Ger. Happy Hanukkah. And go study the book of 1st and 2nd Maccabees in between the Testaments. It has the whole story of Hanukkah, and it is thick and lush with descriptions. Maybe you'll start getting a feeling of how horrible it is to go along with this season. So, happy Hanukkah.